Chapter 4 of A Bullet for Cinderella by John D. MacDonald. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Though the high school kids had gone, the doors were unlocked, and a janitor sweeping green compound down the dark red tiles of the corridor told me I could probably find Mr. Leach in his office on the ground floor of the old building. The two buildings, new and old, were connected. Fire doors separated the frame building from the steel and concrete one. My steps echoed in the empty corridor with a metallic ring. A demure little girl came out of a classroom and closed the door behind her. She had a heavy armload of books. She looked as shy and gentle and timid as a puppy in a strange yard. She looked at me quickly and hurried on down the corridor ahead of me, moccasin soles slapping, meager horsetail bobbing, shoulders hunched. I found the right door and tapped on it. A tired voice told me to come in. Leach was a smallish man with a harsh face, jet eyebrows, and a gray brush cut. He sat at a table marking papers. His desk behind him was stacked with books and more papers. "Something I can do for you?" "My name is Tal Howard. I want to talk to you about a student you used to have." He shook hands without enthusiasm. "An ex-student who is in trouble?" "No, I am refreshed. Not in trouble. Fancy that. The faculty has many callers. Federal narcotics people, parole people, prison officials, county police, lawyers. Sometimes it seems that we turn out nothing but criminals of all dimensions. I interrupted you. I don't want to impose on you. I can see how busy you are. I'm gathering material about Timmy Warden. Ruth Stam suggested I talk to you." He leaned back and rubbed his eyes. "Timmy Warden. Gathering material. That has the sound of a book. Was he allowed to live long enough to give you enough material?" "Timmy and some others. They all died there in the camp. I was there, too. I almost died, but not quite." "Sit down. I'm perfectly willing to talk about him. I take it you're not a professional." "No, sir." "Then this, as a labor of love, should be treated with all respect. Ruth knows as much about Timmy as any person alive, I should say." "She told me a lot, and I got a lot from Timmy, but I need more. She said you were interested in him." "I was. Mr. Howard, you have probably heard of cretins who can multiply two 5-digit numbers mentally and give the answer almost instantaneously." "Yes, but—" I know. Timmy was no cretin. He was a very normal young man, almost abnormally normal, if you sense what I mean. Yet he had a spark, creative mathematics. He could sense the rhythm behind numbers. He devised unique shortcuts in the solution of traditional class problems. He had that rare talent, the ability to grasp intricate relationships and see them in pure, simple form. But there was no drive, no dedication. Without dedication, Mr. Howard, such ability is merely facility, an empty cleverness. I hope to be a mathematician. I teach mathematics in a high school, merely because I did not have enough of what Timmy Warden was born with. I hoped that one day he would acquire the dedication, but he never had time." "I guess he didn't." "Even if he had the time, I doubt that he would have gone any further. He was a very good, decent young man. Everything was too easy for him." "It wasn't easy at the end." "I don't imagine it was, nor easy for hundreds of millions of his contemporaries elsewhere in the world. This is a bad century, Mr. Howard, bad for the young, bad for most of us." "What do you think would have become of him if he'd lived, Mr. Leach?" The man shrugged. "Nothing exceptional. Marriage, work, children, and death. No contribution. His name gone as if it never existed. One of the faceless ones, like us, Mr. Howard." He rubbed his eyes again, then smiled wanly. "I'm not usually so depressing, Mr. Howard. This has been a bad week. This is one of the weeks that add to my conviction that something is eating our young. This week the children have seemed more sullen, dangerous, dispirited, inane, vicious, foolish, and impossible than usual. This week a young sophomore in one of my classes went into the hospital with septicemia as the result of a self-inflicted abortion. And a rather pleasant boy was slashed. And last Monday 2 seniors died in a head-on collision while on their way back from Reading, full of liquor. The man in the other car is not expected to recover. When Timmy was here in school, I was crying doom. But it was not like it is now. By comparison, those were the good old days, recent as they are." "Was Timmy a disciplinary problem?" "No. He was lazy. Sometimes he created disturbances. On the whole, he was cooperative. I used to hope Ruth would be the one to wake him up. She's a solid person. Too good for him, perhaps." "I guess he was pretty popular with the girls." "Very. As with nearly everything else, things were too easy for him." He mentioned some of them in camp: Judy, Ruth, Cindy. "I couldn't be expected to identify them. If I remember correctly, I once had 8 Judys in one class. Now that name, thank God, is beginning to die out a little. There have never been too many Cindys, yet there has been a small, constant supply." "I want to have a chance to talk to the girls he mentioned. I've talked to Ruth. Judy has moved away. I can't remember Cindy's last name. I wonder if there's any way I could get a look at the list of students in hopes of identifying her." "I guess you could," he said. "The administration office will be empty by now. You could ask them Monday. Let me see. Timmy graduated in '46. I keep old yearbooks here. They're over there on the bottom shelf. You could take the ones for that year and the next 2 years and look them over. They're by the window if you like. I have to get on with these papers, and I really can't tell you much more about Timmy. I liked him and had hopes for him, but he lacked motivation. That seems to be the trouble with too many of the children lately. No motivation. They see no goal worth working for. They no longer have any dreams. They are content with the manufactured dreams of NBC and Columbia." I sat by the windows and went through the yearbooks. There was no Cindy in the yearbook for '46. There was one in the '47 yearbook. I knew when I saw her picture that she could not be the one. She was a great fat girl with small, pinched, discontented features, sullen, rebellious little eyes. There was a Cindy in the '48 yearbook. She had a narrow face, protruding teeth, weak eyes behind heavy lenses, an expression of overwhelming stupidity. Yet I marked down their names. It would be worth a try, I thought. I went back to the '46 yearbook and went through page after page of graduates more thoroughly. I came to a girl named Cynthia Cooper. She was a reasonably attractive, snub-nosed blonde. I wondered if Timmy could possibly have said Cynthia. It would be an awkward nickname for Cynthia. And even though his voice by that time had been weak and blurred, I was certain he had said Cindy. He had repeated the name. But I wrote her down, too. Ruth Stam's yearbook picture was not very good, but the promise of her, the clear hint of what she would become, was there in her face. Her activities, listed under the picture, made a long list. It was the same with Timmy. He grinned into the camera. Mr. Leach looked up at me when I stood near his table. "Any luck?" I took down some names. They might help. I thanked him for his help. He was bent over his papers again before I got to the door. Odd little guy, with his own strange brand of dedication and concern. Pompous little man, but with an undercurrent of kindness. I got to the Hillston Inn at a little after 5. I got some dimes from the cashier and went over to where 4 phone booths stood flanked against the lobby wall. I looked up the last name of the fat girl, Cindy Waskowitz. There were 2 Waskowitzes in the book, John W. and P.C. I tried John first. A woman with a nasal voice answered the phone. I'm trying to locate a girl named Cindy Waskowitz who graduated from Hillston High in 1947. Is this her home? Hold it a minute, the woman said. I could hear her talking to someone else in the room. I couldn't make out what she was saying. She came back on the line. You want to know about Cindy? That's right. Please. This wasn't her home, but I can tell you about her. I'm her aunt. You want to know about her? Please. It was the glands. I couldn't remember the word. My daughter just told me. The glands. When she got out from high school, she weighed 200. From there, she went up like balloons. 200, 250, 300. When she died in the hospital, she was nearly 400. She'd been over 400 once, just before she went in the hospital. Glands it was. I remembered the rebellious eyes, girl trapped inside the prison of white, soft flesh. A dancing girl, a lithe, quick-moving girl, forever lost inside that slow, inevitable encroachment. Stilled finally and buried inside her suet prison. Is your daughter about the same age Cindy would have been? A year older. She's married and 3 kids already. The woman chuckled warmly. Could I talk to your daughter? Sure, just a minute. The daughter's voice was colder, edged with thin suspicion. What goes on, anyhow? Why do you want to know about Cindy? I was wondering if she was ever friendly in high school with a boy named Timmy Warden. Timmy is dead. It was in the papers. I know that. Were they friendly? Timmy and Cindy? Geez, that's a tasty combination. He would have known who she was on account of her being such a tub, but I don't think he ever spoke to her. Why should he? He had all the glamour items hanging around his neck. Why are you asking all this? I was in the camp with him. Before he died, he gave me a message to deliver to a girl named Cindy. I wondered if Cindy was the one. Not a chance. Sorry. You just got the wrong one. Was there another Cindy in the class? In one of the lower classes. A funny-looking one. That's the only one I can remember. All teeth. Glasses. A sandy sort of girl. I can't remember her last name, though. Cindy Kirshner? That's the name. Gosh, I don't know where you'd find her. I think I saw her downtown once a year ago. Maybe it's in the book. But I don't think she'd fit any better than my cousin. I mean, Timmy Warden ran around with his own group, kind of. Big shots in the school. That Kirshner wasn't in that class any more than my cousin. Or me. The bitterness was implicit in her tone. I thanked her again. She hung up. I tried Kirshner. There was only one in the book, Ralph J. A woman answered the phone. I'm trying to locate a Cindy Kirshner who graduated from Hillston High in 1948. That's my daughter. Who is this calling, please? Could you tell me how I could locate her? She married, but she doesn't have a phone. They have to use the one at the corner store. She doesn't like to have people call her there because it's a nuisance to the people at the store. And she has small children she doesn't like to leave to go down there and answer the phone. If you want to see her, you could go out there. It's 1610 Blackman Street. It's near the corner of Butternut. A little blue house. Her name is Mrs. Rorick now. Mrs. Pat Rorick. What did you say your name is? I repeated the directions and said, Thanks very much, Mrs. Kirshner. I appreciate your help. Goodbye. I hung up. I was tempted to try Cynthia Cooper, but decided I had better take one at a time, eliminate one before starting the next. I stepped out of the booth. Earl Fitzmartin stepped out of the adjoining booth. He smiled at me almost genially. So it's got something to do with somebody named Cindy. I don't know what you're talking about. I was in camp with Timmy. Before he died, he gave me a message to deliver to a girl named Cindy. So you tried 2 Cindys in a row. And you know when they graduated. Busy, aren't you? Go to hell, Fitz. He stood with his big hard fists on his hips, rocking back and forth from heel to toe, smiling placidly at me. You're busy, Tal. Nice little lunch with Ruth. Trip to the high school. Tracking down Cindy. Does she know where the loot is? He was wearing a dark suit, well cut. It looked expensive. His shoes were shined, his shirt crisp. I wished I'd been more alert. It's no great trick to stand in one phone booth and listen to the conversation in the adjoining one. I hadn't even thought of secrecy, of making certain I couldn't be overheard. Now he had almost as much as I did. How did you get along with George, Howard? I got along fine. Strange guy, isn't he? He's a little odd. And he's damn near broke. That's a shame, isn't it? It's too bad. This damn girl comes around and holds his hand. Maybe it makes him feel better, poor guy. You know, we even had to sell the cabin. Did Timmy ever talk about the cabin? He had talked about it when we were first imprisoned. I'd forgotten about it until that moment. I remembered Timmy saying that it was on a small lake, a rustic cabin their father had built. He and George had gone there to fish many times. He mentioned it, I said. I heard about it after I got here. It seemed like a good place, so I went up there with my little shovel. No dice, Tal. I dug up most of the lake shore. I dug 100 holes. See how nice I am to you? That's one more place where it isn't. Later on, George let me use it for a while before he sold it. It's nice up there. You'd like it. But it's clean. Thanks for the information. I'm keeping an eye on you, Tal. I'm interested in your progress. I'll keep in touch. You do that. Blackman runs east off Delaware. It starts 3 blocks north of here. Butternut must be about 14 blocks over. It's not hard to find. Thanks. I turned on my heel and left him. It was dusk when I headed out Blackman. I found Butternut without difficulty. I found the blue house and parked in front. As I went up the walk toward the front door, the first light went on inside the house. I pushed the bell, and she opened the door and looked out at me, the light behind her, child in her arms. Mrs. Rourke? I'm Mrs. Rourke, she said. Her voice was soft and warm and pleasant. You were Cindy Kirshner, then. I was a friend of Timmy Warden in prison camp. She hesitated for a moment and then said, Won't you come in a minute? When I was inside and she had turned toward the light, I could see her better. The teeth had been fixed. Her face was fuller. She was still a colorless woman with heavy glasses, but now there was a pride about her, a confidence that had been lacking in the picture I had seen. Another child sat on a small tricycle and gave me a wide-eyed stare. Both children looked very much like her. Mrs. Rourke did not ask me to sit down. How well did you know Timmy, Mrs. Rourke? I don't think he ever knew I was alive. In camp, before he died, he mentioned a Cindy. Could you have been the one? I certainly doubt that. It confused me. I said, When I mentioned him, you asked me to come in. I thought... She smiled. I guess I'll have to tell you. I had the most fantastic and awful crush on him. For years and years. It was pathetic. Whenever we were in the same class, I used to stare at him all the time. I wrote letters to him and tore them up. I sent him unsigned cards at Easter and Valentine's Day and Christmas and on his birthday. I knew when his birthday was because once a girl I knew went to a party at his house. It was really awful. It gave me a lot of miserable years. Now it seems funny, but it wasn't funny then. It started in the 6th or 7th grade. He was 2 grades ahead. It lasted until he graduated from high school. He had a red knit cap he wore in winter. I stole it from the cloakroom. I slept with it under my pillow for months and months. Isn't that ridiculous? She was very pleasant. I smiled back at her. You got over it? Oh, yes, at last. And then I met Pat. I'm sorry about Timmy. That was a terrible thing. No, if he mentioned any Cindy, it wasn't me. Maybe he would know me by sight, but I don't think he'd know my name. Could he have meant some other Cindy? It would have had to have been some other Cindy, but I can't think who. There was a girl named Cindy Waskowitz, but it couldn't have been her either. She's dead now. Can you think of who it could be? She frowned and shook her head slowly. No, I can't. There's something in the back of my mind, though, from a long time ago. Something I heard or saw. I don't know. I shouldn't even try to guess. It's so vague. No, I can't help you. But the name Cindy means something. For a moment I thought it did. It's gone now. I'm sorry. If you remember, could you get in touch with me? She smiled broadly. You haven't told me who you are. I'm sorry. My name is Howard, Tal Howard. I'm staying at the Sunset Motel. You could leave a message there for me. Why are you so interested in finding this Cindy? I could at least be consistent. I'm writing a book. I need all the information about Timmy that I can get. Put in that book that he was kind. Put that in. In what way, Mrs. Rourke? She shifted uneasily. I used to have dreadful buck teeth. My people could never afford to have them fixed. One day, that's when I was in John L. Davis School. That's the grade school where Timmy went, too. And it was before they built the junior high. I was in the 6th grade, and Timmy was in the 8th. A boy came in with some funny teeth that stuck way out like mine. He put them in his mouth in assembly, and he was making faces at me. I was trying not to cry. A lot of them were laughing. Timmy took the teeth away from the boy and dropped them on the floor and smashed them under his heel. I never forgot that. I started working when I was in high school and saving money. I had enough after I was out to go get my teeth straightened. But it was too late to straighten them then, so I had them taken out. I wanted marriage, and I wanted children, and the way I was, no man would even take me out. She straightened her shoulders a little. I guess it worked, she said. I guess it did. So put that in the book. It belongs in the book. I will. And if I can remember that other, I'll phone you, Mr. Howard. I thanked her and left. I drove back toward the center of town. I began to think of Fitz again. Ruth was right when she used the word creepy, but it was more than that. You sensed that Fitz was a man who would not be restrained by the things that restrain the rest of us. He had proved in the camp that he didn't give a damn what people thought of him. He depended on himself to an almost psychopathic extent. It made you feel helpless in trying to deal with him. You could think of no appeal that would work. He couldn't be scared or reasoned with. He was as primitive and functional as the design of an axe. He could not even be anticipated because his logic was not of normal pattern. And then, too, there was the startling physical strength. In camp I had seen several minor exhibitions of that power, but only one that showed the true extent of it. Those of us who saw it talked about it for a long time. The guards who saw it treated Fitz with uneasy respect after that. One of the supply trucks became mired inside the compound, rear duals down to the hubs. They broke a tow line trying to snake it out. Then they rounded up a bunch of us to unload the supply truck. The cases aboard had obviously been loaded on with a winch. We got all the stuff off except one big wooden packing case. We never did learn what was in it. We only knew it was heavy. We were trying to get a crude dolly under it, but when we tilted it, we couldn't get the dolly far enough back. Every guard was yelling incomprehensible orders. I imagine Fitz lost patience. He jumped up onto the bed of the truck, put his back against the case, squatted and got his fingers under the edge. Then he came up with it, his face a mask of effort, cords standing out on his throat. He lifted it high enough so the dolly could be put under it. He lowered it again and jumped down off the truck, oddly pale and perspiring heavily. Once it was rolled to the tailgate on the dolly, enough men could get hold of it to ease it down. When it was on the ground, one of the biggest of the guards swaggered up, grinning at his friends, and tried to do what Fitz had done. He couldn't budge it. He and one of his friends got it up a few inches, but not as high as Fitz had. They were humiliated, and they took it out on the rest of us, but not on Fitz. He was left alone. Back in town, I decided I would have a drink at the inn and a solitary meal and try to think of what the next step should be. I was picked up in front of the inn, 10 steps from my car. End of chapter 4.